3 of the Carnegie African Diaspora Fellowship Program, All-Alumni Virtual Convening 2024. So you're welcome. We have already had 2 days of exciting and insightful discussion on the theme of this convening, sustaining the Carnegie African Diaspora Fellowship Program. And today being the 3rd day and the last day, of course, we promise and we're looking forward to another successful and fruitful discussion on how we can sustain collaborations. I'll be running the show with my colleague, Professor Phil Okeke, who is also a steering committee member of this important convening. And so once again, you're warmly welcome and thank you for making time to be part of this important program and important day of the show. I hand you over to Professor Phil Okeke to take over from here.
Thank you very much, Simon. Hello, I hope everyone can hear me.
Yes.
Is everyone? Oh, good.
Yes.
Okay. Good morning, everyone here in North America, and good afternoon to my brothers and sisters in Africa. We are kicking off today with a presentation from Carnegie Corporation's Janice D'Souza. She is a research specialist at Institute of International Education. She will give us a cursory look at CADFP's research, evaluation, and learning. Janice, you have the floor.
Thank you so much for welcoming me. Hello, everyone. I'm Janice D'Souza, the Evaluation and Research Specialist at IIE. I'm happy to be here to share the insights from our 10-year CADFP Legacy Report. In the summer of 2023, the Research Evaluation and Learning Unit shared the Legacy Survey with host fellows and diaspora fellows who completed their grants between the inception of the program and the end of 2022. In the next slide, we'll see our response rates, which are pretty high. So a heartfelt thank you to everyone who completed the survey and shared your thoughts with us. Your input led to some incredible findings, especially related to the sustainability of the program activities over the last 10 years. In the 20 minutes that we have together, I hope to share some of these insights with you. So the survey, basically, we try to capture the legacy of Carnegie African Diaspora Fellowship Program. So the survey asks questions about impact, about sustained collaborations, about sustained contact. In the next slide, we'll see about knowledge and production sharing. So 92% of host and diaspora fellows have actively shared their acquired knowledge and experiences from the programs with their peers and colleagues. This dissemination of insights and expertise extends the benefits of the program far beyond the individual fellows, contributing to a broader culture of learning and professional development within their institutions. Fellows also said that engaging with other host and diaspora fellows has given them new perspectives, enhanced their expertise, and enabled them to adopt innovative practices that have propelled their careers and institutions forward. This quote from a diaspora fellow illustrates the impact of this knowledge production and sharing. I'll read it for you all. Facilitating South-South and South-North collaborations is crucial for enhancing infrastructure and capacity in Africa. Sharing insights on how the CADFP experience and philosophy bridge these gaps, fostering product development and collaborations, is vital for others to grasp the roles we play in strengthening higher education in Africa. This fellow disseminated these experiences through a keynote address in Coimbatore, India, and publications, including one currently under review. In the next slide, we'll see some of these outputs. A significant measure of CADFP's impact is the array of knowledge products generated by its fellows. So here you'll see the breakdown of CADFP knowledge products. We can see that the majority of knowledge products are workshops, seminars, and conference presentations. This is closely followed by peer-reviewed academic journal articles. Peer-reviewed products, including academic journal articles, books, book chapters, typically required 2 to 4 years to complete. Fellows also produce works of art, performances as knowledge products, and shared their knowledge in television and radio programs. On the next slide, we'll talk more about the sustainability. It is clear from the data that CADFP has played a pivotal role in fostering and strengthening sustained collaborative initiatives among fellows. Over the years, CADFP has been a catalyst for facilitating partnerships and connecting scholars from Africa and the African diaspora. In this legacy report, we also looked at the sustainability of CADFP activities over the last decade. So what you're seeing in this figure, you'll see that diaspora fellows have consistently returned to their host institutions beyond the completion of their grant. Over the years, the trend has shown a significant increase. 6 years post-grant, the return rate was highest at 62%, with fellows returning even 9 years after completing their grant. In the next slide, we can see that building upon this extensive network and collaborations established during their initial fellowships, many CADFP alumni revisited their host institutions for further professional engagements. So we see that 47% of diaspora fellows returned to their host communities to continue their research, mentor and teach students, and co-develop curriculum. This quote by a host fellow from South Africa says, "The diaspora fellow is a regular visitor, dedicating at least 6 weeks per year to our department since his initial visit 7 years ago. During this period, he teaches and consults with postgraduate students." In our next slide, we'll see that 79% of host and diaspora fellows agreed that CADFP supported their ability to pursue capacity strengthening education projects, with 81% of diaspora fellows reporting that they're still in contact with their host fellow. The chart we're seeing here shows that diaspora fellows have consistently stayed in contact with their colleagues from their host institution, maintaining an average of 90% in the first 4 years. And even after 9 years, a commendable 63% of fellows continue to foster these enduring and positive professional connections. In another study conducted by the Research Evaluation and Learning Unit at IIE, we learned that 54 follow-on grants amounting to $4.9 million had been awarded to CADFP fellows to continue activities directly related to their fellowship. So CADFP fellows had sought external funding after the completion of their grants to continue their collaborations from their initial CADFP grant. In the next slide, we'll talk about some of the activities and how sustainability played out there. Could you go to the next slide, please? Here we'll focus on curriculum. So co-developing curriculum remained an important activity for host and diaspora fellows. Fellows continued to co-develop curricula for their institutions. So looking at the sustainability over time, both host and diaspora fellows observed that the most robust engagement in developing curricula occurred primarily within the first 2 years following the completion of the grant year and their initial visit. Remarkably, fellows have sustained this involvement, extending up to 9 years, driven by a desire to refine, build, and adapt their curricula over the passing years. In the next slide, we'll look at research. 46% of host and diaspora fellows continue to collaborate on research, with 70% of the research published or shared. As we look at the sustainability over time, diaspora fellows have collaborated on research with their colleagues at host institutions. The engagement began at 50% within a year of completing their grant, rose to 62% 2 years later, and remarkably remained at 53% even 9 years after the grant's conclusion. Both host and diaspora fellows emphasized that once an international research partnership is established in their field, it evolves into a lifelong relationship, fostering ongoing collaboration and growth. This quote here by a Diaspora fellow says that participation in the program has expanded my professional networks, opening up new opportunities for collaborative research and publishing across many disciplines in the humanities and social sciences. In the next slide, we will look at graduate student teaching and mentoring. Diaspora fellows have played a crucial role in shaping the next generation of African scholars through their involvement in graduate student teaching and mentoring at their host institution. Diaspora fellows reported that they continue to offer support by offering feedback on dissertation drafts, writing letters of recommendation, and hosting students at their home institution. We can see here that 71% of host fellows reported that CADFP helped them and their colleagues increase their knowledge about teaching, training, and mentoring graduate students. 74% of the host fellows reported that the students at their home institutions had reaped considerable benefits from CADFP's influence, and 52% of host fellows said that the students at their institution continue to receive mentorship from the Diaspora fellow. The quotes here by the host fellows also illustrate the benefits of this kind of collaboration. In our next slide, we see this continuation. 45% of host fellows said that their institution continues to receive support from the Diaspora fellow on student teaching and mentorship. As we look at the sustainability over time, Diaspora fellows have consistently served as mentors and educators at their host institution. This aligns with their collaborative research efforts, as students also participate as integral members of the research teams of the Diaspora fellows. Fellows also contribute to academic development by remaining involved in dissertation committees, reviewing theses, and providing ongoing support to students. Host fellows also reported that 40% of Diaspora fellows provided resources, 36% said that they engaged in regular virtual communication with staff, and 34% said that they provided feedback on publication or other projects. So we can see here in this chart that after a year it's at 64, but even at 9-year mark, it still remains steady at 47%. In our next slide, we can look at long-term capacity strengthening. The influence of CADFP is clear in the way that host institutions have embraced and utilized the programs, interventions, and improvements built by the host and Diaspora fellows. On this slide, you will see that host and Diaspora fellows report on improvements that their institutions made because of CADFP. 71% of Diaspora fellows reported that their host institutions had effectively integrated changes in graduate student mentorship. 65% of Diaspora fellows reported that their host institutions improved their research programs during the CADFP fellowship, and 59% of Diaspora fellows reported that CADFP helped facilitate their host institutions' curriculum development. Host fellows also report that because of CADFP, their institutions made improvements. 66% saw improvements in faculty professional development training. 64% said that they had some improvements in collaboration with institutions outside their country. 62% saw some improvements in institutional research. 57% reported some improvements in collaboration with institutions in their country, and 55% in curriculum development. 39% said there was some changes and some improvements in higher education administration. These adaptations are a testament to the practicality and the applicability of the contributions made by CADFP fellows. indicating a direct enhancement of institutional capacities. In the next slide, we can see this with the long-term capacity strengthening and how it has impacted their impact on other African HCIs. The impact of CADFP is most deeply felt by host institutions and fellows, leaving a lasting imprint on the departments and African institutions involved. 52% of Diaspora fellows engaged in collaborations with African higher education institutions beyond their host institution, with 51% still actively involved in these collaborations. 47% of the fellows acknowledged the pivotal role of CADFP in facilitating and establishing these valuable collaborations. What we've learned during this survey and study is that collaborative projects, enhanced institutional capabilities, and a culture of mutual respect are tangible outcomes contributing to CADFP's enduring legacy within the broader landscape of higher education in Africa. This quote here by a host fellow says that since the arrival of the Diaspora fellow, there has been an increased openness to hosting researchers from across and various institutions. Presently, we are welcoming professors from other African universities to collaborate with our faculties. In our next slide, we will look at the impact this has had on you, the alumni. The impact of CADFP extends beyond institutional contributions, profoundly influencing its fellows' personal and professional lives. 98% of host and Diaspora fellows reported a positive impact on their personal growth. 98% of host and Diaspora fellows also experienced a positive impact on their professional advancement, and 97% of all fellows acknowledge a positive impact in expanding knowledge and perspectives on African systems of higher education. This quote here by a Diaspora fellow says, CADFP has profoundly enhanced my professional profile, expanded my professional reach, and facilitated my growth as a scholar, teacher, as a researcher, and as a human being. In the next slide, we see this continuation and the impact of CADFP extending beyond just institution. CADFP's impact on its fellows' personal and professional realms is profound and multidimensional. By fostering personal growth, enhancing understanding of African educational systems, aiding professional advancement, and developing skills for international and interdisciplinary collaboration, the program has significantly contributed to developing well-rounded, globally competent scholars and educators. You can see here that 98% of all fellows noted a positive impact on their ability to approach and undertake international collaborations in mutually beneficial ways. 95% of fellows agreed that CADFP has positively influenced their range of professional expertise, with 91% of fellows reporting that their ability to communicate clearly with academics in other disciplinary fields has been positively impacted. The quote here by a host fellow says, CADFP has sparked my interest in venturing beyond my comfort zone to explore what's happening in other African institutions. It's opened my eyes to various grant opportunities and how to go about applying for them. On a department level, we're eager to create chances for our staff to broaden their horizons by experiencing different institutions for their ongoing professional development. In the next slide, we'll look at the alumni network. Forming a strong and interactive alumni network is a hallmark of the Carnegie African Diaspora Fellowship Program, its legacy. Fellows have maintained active connections with fellow program alumni, leveraging these ties for professional collaboration. You can see that host Diaspora fellows saw other fellows as a source of support, motivation, and collaboration. And 52% of fellows have engaged in collaborative projects with other African higher education institutions outside their host institution. I will end this session with a quote from a fellow after the last convening. After the alumni convening and meeting alumni, I contributed to another Diaspora Fellows NSF grant proposal. I also provided input to CADFP alumni in Texas regarding a program recruiting female graduate students from Africa. This quote really illustrates the expansive reach of CADFP as its alumni continue to leverage their experience and networks to benefit a wider spectrum of academic institutions across the globe. Thank you so much for having me here. The CADFP Legacy Report will be available to you at the end of March, and the program team will be sending you all a link. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you very much, Janice, for this insightful presentation. Colleagues and participants, let me introduce you to the chat box where a question has been posed by Yenechel from the last 2 days. Domestication of CADFP has been challenged. The word domestication. So the steering committee is looking forward to a new and alternative to the word domestication. We will deliberate that, but we want you to visit the chat box and put yourself in readiness for that. And so I now hand over to Phil to introduce Paul.
Thank you very much, Simon. Dr. Paul Zeleza is an iconic figure in Africa's higher education, in research, and indeed the public sphere and beyond. Many of us, including those who have never met him in person, have benefited immensely from his mentorship, as well as from scholarly resources and opportunities. He laid the groundwork for CADFP through a report that informed the architects of this program, and he chaired CADFP Advisory Committee for several years. For many of you who've not met Paul, this is the Professor Paul Zeleza we talk about. Paul, you have the floor.
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me?
Good morning. Yeah, we can hear you.
Oh, wonderful. I'm really delighted to join you this morning. And I want to thank all of you for participating in this very important event for the last couple of days. And I want to thank Jeremy in particular for facilitating my attendance for a few minutes with you. As was just mentioned, it really gives me great pleasure to see how this program has developed. It started in 2011 when I was asked by the Carnegie Corporation of New York to do a research project on trying to find out how do African-born academics in Canada and the United States engage with African institutions. First of all, just to find out how many are they, and what kinds of career trajectories do they have, and how could we leverage this very important asset into what I call intellectual remittances. We all know about the financial remittances to the continent, that the African diaspora, the new diaspora, is Africa's major donor with over the last several years. And it seemed to me that we also needed to leverage the intellectual resources of this huge and important population. The research was done in Canada and the US between 2011 and 2012, and also in a number of African countries, in Southern Africa, in West Africa, as well as in East Africa. And we decided that it made sense to actually set up a program. This is one of the few research areas that I've been engaged in that resulted in an actual program, and I'm extremely grateful to the Carnegie Corporation of New York and the IIE, and of course there were other people who were involved in the initial meeting where I submitted the report in New York at the Carnegie Corporation headquarters in February 2013, and we set up the program later that year, and over the last several years as you all know, it has resulted in more than 600 African-born academics in the two countries visiting more than 170 universities. What has been particularly gratifying is to see that it has ended up being a kind of fertilizer to engagements, because all of us as African-born academics in North America, we do engage Africa. But what it has done is to catalyze those engagements and formalize them in many ways. And as Jeremy shares with you, this has resulted in all sorts of partnerships, post-fellowship that have been established, some of them, of course, at an individual level. But what is gratifying is also the fact that many of those partnerships have been inter-institutional in the areas of teaching, in the areas of research, and of course, in the areas of graduate student training and supervision, the original 3 areas of focus for the program. It seems to me now, given the success of this program, that we need to, if I talk about the next point, is that it has continually been improved over time, precisely out of the feedback that people who have participated in the program have given to the advisory council. One of the most interesting aspects of this program that you of course are aware of is the structure, in which we were very deliberate in making sure that it has a multi-pronged structure. A lot of international exchange programs tend to be rather simple in structure, but more importantly, they tend to focus on the global north as the driver in those exchanges. In this one, we were very intentional in setting up a 4-institution type of structure. Carnegie Corporation, of course, providing the funds, IIE providing the administrative support, and the advisory council comprised of some top African academics as well as administrators, both in North America as well as on the continent and in Europe, providing the policy making capacity, and then of course having a secretariat that coordinates these programs. The first 2 secretariats tended to be at the institutions where I was located, first at Quinnipiac in the US, and then when I was Vice Chancellor in Nairobi at the United States International University, the secretariat was there. And the decision was made when I left USIU that we needed to locate the secretariat at a major African institution that brings the universities together. And you all know that that's the AAU, the Association of African Universities. Having been this successful, the question is, what next? And a number of us have been thinking about developing and expanding this type of engagement into what we've been calling the Consortium of African Diaspora Scholars Programs. And the intention is really to ensure that we tap into the African diaspora as a whole, not just the African-born, because we all know that, of course, the African diaspora as a whole is huge. Almost 200 million people in the Americas, in Europe, parts of Asia, and so on and so forth. And even those of us who are African-born, those of us who've been here for a long time, we have our children who are born here, and many of them are now academics, and they cannot participate in this program in the way it's been constructed because it's for the African-born. So we want to have a program that is able to encompass the entire African diaspora. Secondly, as you also know, this program works specifically. Originally, it worked in 6 countries: Ghana, Nigeria, Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania, and South Africa. And then a few years ago, we expanded it to 3 other countries: Rwanda, Senegal, and Ethiopia. It seems to me we also need to make sure that the program that can work in tandem with this one can encompass the entire continent, from Algeria to South Africa, from Somalia to Senegal. And then thirdly, that building again on this program, we need to be able not only to work with universities, because of course universities, while they are at the center of knowledge production, there are also other sites in the ecosystem of knowledge production, including research centers, think tanks, even corporates usually, the really big ones tend to have research capacities of one type or another. And of course, we all know that NGOs and community-based organizations also do have research needs and research capacities that we can work in collaboration. So to expand the range of engagements beyond the universities to other arenas of knowledge production on the continent. So the consortium that we've been planning to set up, we started talking about this, in fact, quite early on, after the Carnegie program had been established. And by 2019, we had registered the consortium as a not-for-profit organization in Nairobi, as an international organization in Nairobi, as well as a 501c organization in New York, because obviously it needs to have both an African as well as a northern, legal structure or standing, and we are hoping that with this program is going to leverage and build on the successes of the Carnegie program by including also players, including funders from Europe, from Asia, and from other parts of the Americas, so that we leverage the successes of this program. The African diaspora is extremely important for the 21st century. We know the African continent. Some people even argue that the 21st century is an African century because of the rapid population growth that we are all experiencing on the continent. In 2020, as you all know, the continent had 17% of the world's population. By 2050, this is supposed to grow to 25%, and by the end of this century, is going to be about 40% of the world's population. So because of these demographic shifts, but also the economic changes that are taking place and the global challenges that the world is facing, from climate change to forces that are trying to undermine democracy and so on and so forth, the position of Africa is going to be increasingly important on the global stage. And in order to make sure that we turn this demographic explosion into a dividend rather than a disaster, we have to make sure that our young people are given the best education they can have on the continent, as well as outside the continent, and in collaboration between our colleagues who are on the continent in various arenas of the educational enterprise, the research enterprise, and those of us who happen to be on this side of the Atlantic, or the other side of the Indian Ocean, or the other side of the Mediterranean. So once again, I'm very delighted to be able to meet with you, and really, really happy to see the extent to which this program, now in its 11th year, has grown by leaps and bounds. It's not every day you do a research project that ends up creating a program of such magnitude. So I'm very, very grateful to Carnegie, to IIE, to my colleagues that I worked with on the council, advisory council, when I was chairing until 2021. And of course, I'm above all very grateful to all of you for having taken your time to participate and make a difference to the education, to the research, to the capacity building of our institutions on the continent. So thank you very much.
All right. Thank you very much, Professor Zeleza, for this insightful comment. And then we also thank you very much for sharing with us the brief history of this important program and the way forward. This is an impactful research that has led to this important program. And moving on, we hope that's going to be bigger and better. Okay. I think I now want to introduce, and before then, I think, Jeremy, your hand was up?
No, I was thanking Professor Zeleza for
Okay.
his contributions to the convening. Thank you, Simon.
That's great. All right. On this note, now we want to invite Dr. Ayinecho, but before he comes, let me indicate that you can have your comments, your questions. If you have questions, you go to the Q&A tab and then put in your questions there. If you have comments, that will contribute to the question that have already been put by Ayinecho, our Reporter General. You go there and put your comments. If you have any other comments related to issues that have been raised or the comments on any topic that has been discussed so far, go to the chat box and put it out there. On this note, I invite our Rapporteur General, Dr. Ayinecho, to give us the brief on what happened yesterday.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Simon. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. So my job is just to give a little bit of a highlight as to what were the main points of discussion yesterday. Yesterday, we had a wonderful session, plenary sessions, which included panels from funders and fellows. In the funders panel, we had a range of different organizations represented, and each of the representatives introduced their organizations and what they do in general. And they also talked about the different funding mechanisms that are in place within their institution. And they specifically focused on those funding mechanisms that are particularly available for African scholars and or those that focus on collaborative engagements. They also highlighted some very important insights that they think would increase the probability of applicants getting a grant. So what do you have to keep in mind with regard to applying to different funding opportunities? Many of the panelists emphasized that it is important to know the funding agencies and what they are looking for, what specific area they are focusing on, and what they're prioritizing. And this is something that could possibly change from time to time. Priorities do change. And so to be very familiar with the needs, with the preferences, with the funding mechanisms and so on of the funding agency that you are applying is a very critical element that determines your probability. They also advised that it's important to build a network of possibly interdisciplinary network or group of researchers, rather than just focusing on one specific discipline, rather than just applying as a sole individual, collaborating, building a network and coming as a group, preferably an interdisciplinary group, is likely to get more attention from funding organizations. They also advised that it's important for everyone to know exactly what their strengths are and to craft their grant applications around their strengths. If you know your strengths and weaknesses, and if you try to focus on those areas where you excel, then you would have a better chance rather than just going very generic. Emphasizing program benefits for host countries as well as to the larger community in the field is also another important thing they emphasized. So these are very few of the several points that they emphasized. They also talked about how important networking is and how keeping the relationship with funding organizations are and so on. Now, next, we had a panel of fellows, which included both host fellows and diaspora fellows. And the fellows also talked about their own experiences of how they applied and how they got, what they did with that opportunity and so on. And at the end, they also talked about some of the key takeaways, some of the lessons that they wanted to share for other people if they are interested in applying. And one of the things they said was that you need to be actively seeking funding, that nobody is going to come and knock at your door to give you money, to give you a grant. So it's up to you to actively engage with funding organizations, to network with people of similar interest, to regularly check available online sources, go to the websites of the funding agencies, make use of the calls that might be published in your institution, reach out to funders proactively and ask about funding opportunities, upcoming opportunities, and so on. Go to conferences and workshops and engage with other fellow researchers and so on. So some activity is necessary. They also emphasized that it is important to think in a more diversified manner. And they talked about diversity in diversifying rather in 3 different ways. The first one is, rather than sticking to one funding organization which you think is the best one, it's always a good idea to diversify, to apply to as many funding organizations as possible and create a larger opportunity for you that gives you a better probability of winning grants. And another aspect of diversifying is diversifying the team of people that you are working with. So if you are going as an interdisciplinary group rather than as an individual, then you would have a better chance of meeting some of the requirements of the major funding organizations. And also diversifying the different dimensions of the grant that you are applying for: teaching, research, outreach, community engagement, and things of that sort. So when there are several dimensions packed together into one grant application, then that is likely to get more attention. They've also talked about different ways of strengthening your researcher profile, like by assembling a good interdisciplinary team, by working with mentors, and crafting a proposal that is specifically focused on the priority areas of the funding organizations that you are interested in. They also talked about publishing and getting more visibility. One of the fellows said something that caught my attention. He said, there is no such thing as insignificant research. So whatever research you do, then publish them, talk about them, share them with your colleagues, and so on and so forth. And also they strongly advise that it's important to keep updating yourself, continuously learning. Both the funders panel and the fellows panel emphasized the importance of collaboration and networking. Where you network, you create opportunities. You engage with people, you create opportunities. And yes, of course, sometimes it's a challenge because networking and maintaining a networking relationship is expensive. It takes time, it takes money, it takes it also has emotional costs and so on and so forth. But it is always important to do that. And finally, they also highlighted some very important pointers like how it's critical to be grounded in the things that you do, having a solid ground in your discipline, on the different researches and teaching engagements that you have, and the importance of not shying away from challenges. Sometimes there would be challenges when you are collaborating. Some of them come only because of different organizational or institutional policies and procedures and so on. So it's always a good thing to have an open communication with whoever you are collaborating. And also investing in relationships will finally pay off. So these are some of the very few of the many points that were raised as they were articulated by both the representatives of funding organizations as well as the fellows, both the diaspora and the host fellows. Thank you very much, and back to you, Simon.
Thank you very much, Ayunacha, our Rapporteur General, for bringing it up to speed on what happened yesterday. Ladies and gentlemen, our next speaker needs no elaborate introduction in African scholarly circles and beyond.
It is our pleasure to invite Africa's eminent scholar and research administrator, Dr. Godwin Rapando Murunga, to address the audience.
All right, let me indicate that Dr. Murunga is the Executive Secretary of the Council for the Development of Social Science Research in Africa, known popularly as CADFP, based in Dakar, Senegal. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Murunga.
Thank you very much, Chair, for the opportunity to speak to this group of extremely eminent colleagues, a good many of whom I know personally, but some who I'm meeting for the very first time. And I want to thank the AAU and the IIE for the invitation they extended to me to speak on the topic of sustaining collaborations. I have roughly 15 minutes, and so what I'm going to present cannot in any way qualify to be a keynote address because the time just doesn't allow that. But I wanted to start by congratulating this particular program for attaining its 10th anniversary and for the immense contribution that I personally feel has been made. When the idea of developing this program was started, I also happened to have been involved in some minor ways. And at the time, I was not at CADFP, but I know that CADFP was very much at the table when this particular idea was being grown, and we've seen it germinate in very interesting ways. One just comes to this with a sense of hope that the idea of sustaining collaborations will remain at the heart of the work that this particular program will do, because we've tended to think about the very idea of migration of people, of labor, of skills from Africa into the rest of the world in negative ways. And so we've tended to think of it largely as brain drain. But in fact, as the late Ali Mazrui reminded us, there is a notion of brain circulation that sits at the heart of the work that African academics do when they migrate to the global north in particular. In fact, more recently, a notion of global Africa has been popularized to begin to bring a certain unity among the peoples of African descent anywhere that they are in the world. And the idea there is to appreciate the level of circulation of knowledge, the level of circulation of skills and labor that people carry when they go elsewhere. So it seems to me that at the heart of the work that this particular program is doing around collaborations is to give sense and meaning and actually give depth to the idea of brain circulation, which, as I was preparing for this particular presentation, I took note that even the Africa Development Bank has begun to take a particular interest in how skills that rotate around the world from Africa can be harnessed and used for the better of the continent. And I feel that this is very important because those who conceptualized the notion of brain drain had the very feeling that part of the consequences of brain drain has been the underdevelopment of Africa. The very fact that African countries invest a lot of resources in training particular people in particular skills, and at the end of the day, because of challenges of employability in particular on the continent, they end up working somewhere outside Africa. And more recently, we've been forced to begin to appreciate the contribution of African academics in particular, but the African diaspora in general, to the work that we do, mainly because of the triggers of remittance. But actually, I want to make the point that remittance is just but one small element, measured monetarily, if you will, of the contribution of the diaspora. I think that this particular program does demonstrate to us that beyond financial resources, there are in fact other benefits that Africa will eventually gain as a result of engaging especially intellectuals, scholars of Africa who are living abroad, but more importantly, perhaps as a result of engaging other communities in the global African notion that I have mentioned, that give back to the continent in ways perhaps that are beyond the tyranny of measurable outcomes. This particular program has, as Professor Zeleza has just mentioned a few minutes ago, pays specific attention to collaborations measured really around individual collaborations. But in fact, there is a strong element of institutional collaborations that appeals the individual entry point that the program has accepted. So that at the end of the day, one makes the assumption, and I think this program makes a valid assumption, that if you're having someone coming and joining into an African university for a period of time to co-develop curriculum, to do all those interesting things that they do, at the end of the day, the institution automatically benefits out of this particular process. And so using individual scholars as entry points into making contributions that we hope might revitalize higher education institutions, to me, seems a very important thing to do. So I don't think that we anymore need an argument as to why this is important. This is important by itself. And the argument for why it doesn't make sense to me anymore. Because at the end of the day, it fosters linkages that have been very rare. It transfers skills into our universities that are needed. It helps develop networks, perhaps in ways that we did not anticipate. The late Professor Tandika Mkanda, one of my predecessors, Codesria, used to know that the notion of networking had been abused to the extent that all that happened was that scholars in the global north do the netting and the scholars in the global south do the working. And I think that it's a very strong element of this program that abuses us of that particular tendency within the notion of networking. And I think that networking is therefore a very central component and therefore aim of this particular program. And generally, the scholarly mobility of scholars based in African universities has been fostered in some way that program. And I think that we need to appreciate many of these gains, some of which can be measured. Janice just made other benefits of this program, of these collaborations that cannot be measured in the sense in which perhaps our partners who support the work might want to. There is obviously a question, it's only 10 years now, there is a question that, that remains, the extent to which this particular intervention has helped beat back some of the central challenges around so-called brain drain that we experience. I just want to caution that for the notion of sustainability to make sense, we have to appreciate how complex and difficult and actually just challenging the higher education sector in Africa is. So measuring gains, sustaining collaborations, and all those things that we anticipate to do has to be measured against a background that we must acknowledge. Higher education environment in Africa that is too difficult for any one single institution or any one single individual to be able to comprehend. The challenge is rising higher education, therefore, is very, very ambitious in order to make significant difference in that terrain. The situation has been so dire for so long that a 10 years intervention might sound like a drop in the ocean. And so being very focused on where we want to go is important. I'm saying this only to make the point that we are entering a new period in Africa again, a question that mimics the previous era of structural adjustment programs, where external agencies managed our economies on our behalf, where they issued instructions about the position and spend that essentially means privatization of higher education sector. So that if in the 1960s, the value of higher education in Africa was that it was the single most important equalizer among people of different classes. Today, it's much more difficult to attain that particular goal. And so the intervention that about that is important for the purpose of sustaining collaboration is being worked out against a background of such difficulty, should take them for granted. So that it means that for any significant change to be realized in this sector, mobilizing resources and skills to effect a turnaround is urgently needed. But I want to say that CADFP can't do it alone. This particular program can't do it alone. The African Association of Universities can't do it alone. We are left without any option but to nurture and sustain collaborative initiatives that collectively are capable of making a dent in this very difficult environment that we are operating in. Of course, in doing so, we have to accept two things. One, the vastness of that particular sector. It's a vast sector. And secondly, the complexity of the knowledge production enterprise in itself. It's a very complex process. And by itself, therefore, we have to begin to think about that. In a couple of years, Africa has seen a comparatively higher rate of expansion of the higher education sector in terms of universities present, but also in terms of numbers of students at various levels. And this rapid change is competing with putting in place in order to stabilize the sector and to make it a more productive contributor to it than it has been before. There is an even more interesting demographic change that is across the higher education sector, but especially with universities. And that demographic shift is one in which the average age of first-year university student in any university today is much lower compared to the days when some of us, for instance, went into the university. Some of us went into the university when we were over 24 years old. Today, it's possible in Kenyan university, for instance, university. I think this point to make the argument that with such a demographic, the associational life within the significantly therefore shifted. In our university, you didn't have a mobile, you didn't have lots of technologies, you couldn't easily do an online course. Today, all those are possible. There are things happening among the cohort of university students today that I imagined about 20 years ago when I was an undergraduate student in the university. And what that means is that any intervention that is designed to resolve some of the challenges that those universities facing has to keep abreast with the associational life in the university. And this is important for me, partly because the changes themselves are very dramatic. And interventions that don't pay attention to that dramatic change are certainly going to be falling behind in terms of what we want to do. So given this vastness, it makes sense that no research institute can afford to live in splendid isolation. And I think the advantage of this particular program is that it's bringing networks, dissolving silos, and attempting to make connections that were not there. It's bringing energies to the table that in previous times would have been ignored. And one of the good consequences of that is that not only are we expanding the notion of resources away from a financial resource consideration to other human resource considerations, but we also therefore enabling the production of knowledge in a context that allows for us to share cultural language from different regions of the world. And one of the recommendations that I think has to seriously is to expand beyond the country of focus. Africa is a completely diverse continent with different traditions of learning that many of us perhaps may not be in touch with. Diversifying those, the rich cohort of work that speaks to these issues, I think is a very important thing for us to do. Harnessing diversities of thought, harnessing diversities of practice and engagement will be central to growing the collaborations that we need to do. And I hope that at the end of the day, the notion of care of fact will be a lot more into consideration and a lot more visible than has been known to exist. Of course, I want to conclude my intervention with a caution that there are dangers built in collaborative enterprises, this one being one example, but there are many, many, many other examples that do exist. And we need to remain very aware of them. a significant part of those dangers, of course, is the International Intellectual Division of Labor that assigns what kinds of knowledge are legitimate, what kinds of knowledge are authorized, and what others are not. Which forms of knowledge are delegitimized and which ones are not. A lot of this has a global, it has a north-south pattern, beginning to be reproduced at different places, for instance, China versus Africa and things like that. That danger is one that we need to take on head on. It's a danger that devalues indigenous forms of knowing. It's a danger that delegitimizes knowledge that is produced outside the framework of modern ways of knowing, and especially Western ways of knowing. And of course, the implication for both knowledge and also for inclusivity questions is that those who operate on the continent are an appendage to a system of knowledge, a system of work that doesn't really take us as the center of the work we do. We need to take onto this directly, because perhaps without knowing, occasionally with knowing, there is an assumption built into our systems of knowing, both in Africa and outside, that the best solutions to Africa's problem must be packaged from elsewhere. And our response has always been this society that has ever developed on the basis of knowledge produced for it by other people. I just can't of think. And so we make the case for us to deal with this division of labor that is dangerous to the work we do. Of course, there are major shifts that have been happening in the government and ancient challenge there. Many of the institutions of knowledge production in the social sciences and beyond, actually, that do it on the continent, including codesry, have depended on resources given to them by taxpayers of different European, North American countries, and also from foundations and institutions like Carnegie Corporation. This terrain is changing rapidly, and we are not seeing a commensurate response from African governments. And so while we develop and hope that the partnerships are going to develop, they need to begin to shift in that direction to allow for us to have a horizontal networking of people across the continent, supported by resources that are homegrown, is going to become even more important. And we have to begin to pay attention to some of these. And of course, the implication of progress has to be something that we take on very, very clearly. Our hope, and in conclusion, is that we leverage the strengths of the different actors in different partnerships, so that collaborations are all about leveraging our strengths rather than reproducing and duplicating what the other one is doing. And if we do that, I get the sense that we're going to make serious progress. Finally, everyone else is as concerned and making as much noise as ought to be for some change within the higher education sector. African governments aren't showing a similar level of energy, and a similar level of commitment, similar level of concern. And I think at a policy level, we will need to begin to collaborate, particularly on this particular thing, because it's not anymore acceptable that many African countries dedicate less than 2%, actually way less than 2% of their GDP on supporting the higher education sector, and even less in supporting the universities in themselves. So thank you for listening to me. I hope that this provoked quite a bit of thinking around the issue of sustaining collaborations, and all the very best.
Thank you very much, Dr. Murunga, for doing justice to today's theme, or sub-theme address, which is on sustaining collaborations. Let's remind our participants that the theme for this convening is sustaining the Carnegie African Diaspora Fellowship Program, which is very important for this. And the first day, we looked at domesticating the program. The second day, which was yesterday, we looked at building successful research ecosystems. And today, which is the third day, the theme is sustaining collaborations. Let me remind you that I'm doing this facilitation with my colleagues, Professor Phil Okeke,